Silas woke up that morning with the pure joy that only a 7-year-old can feel. Putting up the shiny birthday card he made for his mom, he had a big smile on his face. Stickers with jagged edges and his name written in that cute, shaky handwriting that hurt my chest every time I saw it. He said, "She's going to love this," feeling proud as if he had made something valuable. And he thought he had. That's why I agreed to take him. No more than an hour. The house on the lake looked like a ghost from my past. 3 years ago, Maya and I stood in that kitchen with wine glasses in one hand and paint samples in the other. We dreamed of getting older in front of that stone fireplace. The room was now decorated in soft blues and golds, making it look like a magazine spread. Maya has always had a good sense of what looks good. They were no longer ours, though. She owned them and the Romans did. Romeo, who jumped in before the divorce papers were even signed. I parked down the street 2 blocks away. It was hard for me to pull into the driveway. As we walked up the dirt path, Silas held the card tight in his little hands. I tried not to look around, but every stone and wood shingle brought back memories. Before we got there, the front door opened. Eloise, her mom, chin raised as if she were still having tea with a queen. She said, "Well?" And her eyes fell on me like I had smudged a white carpet. Didn't think the help would come in person. Silas jerked. I put my hand on a shoulder. I told them we wouldn't be here for long. Roman walked up to her and held a champagne flute like it was a prize. His button-down shirt fit like it was made for a man who thought he had one. He kept looking at me like I didn't fit. "Lost, are we?" he said with a smile. "It looks like this is a teacher meeting, Warren." The next laugh wasn't very loud, but it could be heard. From the hall where the guests are. From Maya, who was standing next to the cake table and acting like she wasn't there. Silas wrapped his fingers around mine even tighter. I got down on my knees and looked him in the eyes. I asked, "You want to give her the card?" After some thought, he nodded. We went over to the table. Maya saw us and her eyes widened for a split second before she put on a fake smile. The kind that didn't reach her eyes. She knelt down and said, "Hi, baby." Silas held out the card and said, "You came." He didn't let go right away. He said, "I made it all by myself." She said, "I can tell. It looks lovely." I took a step back and gave them room to breathe. Not enough to be forgotten. That's when I saw it. Again, Eloise whispered to Roman behind her flute, and his laugh made me think they had planned the joke ahead of time. I went to the door. I had seen enough. Silas didn't move when I took his hand to leave, though. He looked out to the hallway that went to the study, which was on the other side of the room. His face was very pale. And he whispered, "Dad, we need to go. There's a problem." I got down on his level. "What did you see?" He shook his head and looked quickly at the study. "Not see this. They called your name. This is not nice for me." The room was still the same. The cake still had gold lights that made it shine. Along with the hum, the music changed, and it felt like the walls had ears and the air had lost its pressure. My training began to pay off. Gut feeling. I stood still and looked at the doors. As Roman looked at us now, it was funny. It was figuring out. I gave one nod. "Let's go." Silas didn't ask anything. He walked quickly next to me like his little legs knew it was important. I didn't need to say anything. Maya called after us as we got to the door. "You're not even going to stay for the pictures." I looked at her. I said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "He shouldn't be scared here at all." She smiled a little, but she didn't stop us. They didn't do any of them. We went down the same gravel road. There is more laughter coming from behind, but it is softer and duller now, like it was just another party or Saturday. But I could feel my heart beating in my throat. When they got to the car, Silas got in the back seat without saying a word. I leaned against the roof and closed the door. My eyes were drawn to the trees, the lawns of my neighbors, and the end of the street. I felt it, but I didn't see it. The situation had changed, but it wasn't over yet. Not even close. Silas and I didn't talk until we were about halfway down the road. I didn't need to. I understood more from his quiet than from what he said. I wasn't going to push him either. Not when the back of my neck pricked up like it does when something is not only wrong but also dangerous. As we pulled away from the lake house, the gravel under the tires crunched. As you look back, the party seems like a bad dream that you don't want to remember. But the worry didn't go away. Not even when we got to the main road. Things actually got worse. I saw it in the SUV's rearview mirror. 2 cars behind us went black. It is too clean and uniform. It followed me when I turned onto Elkview. Not as fast as I am, but just slow enough to keep my sight without being noticed. It would look like nothing to everyone else. My job as a personal security guard has been for 10 years. Important clients who expect you to find a tail before breakfast. This one was taught. Not carelessly but on purpose, or even worse, through monitoring. Silas didn't know. Not yet. I looked at him through the mirror instead. I said, "Hey buddy," in a light voice. He looked up from the card and asked, "Want to play a quick game?" It was still held. A game. Yeah, top secret spy stuff. You're the mission. You've got to stay low, hide behind the seat, and don't peek up. Think you can do that? He paused, then nodded slowly. I'm the mission. The most important one, I said, turning left without signaling and taking my time on the back roads, where there wasn't as much traffic and my senses were stronger. Agent Silas, this is Operation Stay Invisible. He slid behind my seat and didn't say anything else. I started weaving through the grid without panicking. I didn't use hard brakes or swerves. I just made small changes. I went around a school zone twice and then sneaked through a construction detour I knew from months ago. When I finished the third loop, I saw the same SUV 3 cars behind me. I knew it wasn't random, it wasn't an accident, it was intentional. I put the gas on and pulled into the parking lot under Jackson Ford's law office. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was also an ex-special ops soldier like me. We'd been in the same unit overseas, but we had different jobs but the same mindset. He was the only person I could trust to disappear if I asked him to. I turned off the engine, told Silas to stay put, and jumped out. I used the bypass code he showed me on a drunken night 6 years ago. Even though we both swore we'd never need it, and the metal door opened. We stayed hidden behind rows of concrete columns, just floating in the air, safe for now. I knelt next to Silas on the cold concrete floor and told him, "You did great." He looked up at me, his voice barely above a whisper, and said, "They were in the study." I stopped breathing. "Who?" I asked. "Roman and a man with a scar on his cheek. Big guy." He looked mean. I slowly nodded. Something about taking care of things. The man said something about loose ends. And Roman said, "He doesn't even know we've been watching." This made my stomach drop. They called my name. Silas nodded. "Dad, they called your name." I took a moment to look away and stared at the concrete wall, the faded oil stains, and the faint sound of tires from the street. I thought the party would be awkward and maybe even be rude, but this was something else, something older than Ma's grudge. They weren't watching me because I was her ex, but because I was something else, a variable they hadn't been able to control. I stood and walked a few steps to let the facts sink in. Roman.
No, Brice.
At the time, I didn't know that the name he gave wasn't real. He had smiled too much and worn his newfound wealth like an outfit. And now that I know the truth, that wasn't the smile of a man who had moved on. That was the smirk of someone who knew what was going to happen. "Dad." Silas's voice pulled me back. I knelt down in front of him again and told him, "You did the right thing by telling me." He looked confused. "Did I get us in trouble?" I asked. "No," I said, "you might have gotten us out of it." We stayed there for an hour. I called Jackson from the secure line in the utility room and left a coded message using our old phrase from deployment. "The package is in the wind." This meant we were not connected to the internet. We needed eyes everywhere, so I turned off my phone and put all of my trackable items in a metal case that I had kept in the trunk of my car for emergencies like the ones you don't think are going to happen until they do. "Where are we going now?" Silas asked as I buckled them back in. I told Aunt June, "Just for a few days. Your favorite pancakes will be made by her. That place is safe for you. How about you?" I fake smiled. "I need to talk to a few people about some things." He didn't say anything else until we were almost there. He just hummed to himself that silly tune he always sang when he built Legos. But my mind was already going fast. Roman, the scarred man. Loose ends. I wasn't a loose end. Someone just lit the fuse. Her name was Danny Linwood. I hadn't thought of that name in months, maybe even longer. Maya's college friend and one of the few people who didn't leave my life when the divorce papers were signed. Danny wasn't close to me. Not in the usual way, but she did pull me aside once in the early days of the breakup. It was just a whisper over coffee at a bookstore where no one was supposed to hear you. You need to look closer, she said in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. There's more going on than you realize. I pressed her and asked what she meant. She looked nervous and kept fiddling with her cup sleeve. I'm working on something, she said. But I'll bring it to you when I can prove it. She never did. Over time, I thought it was because she was angry about something from college or an old grudge that was dressed up as concern. Until last night when I got a message on my burner phone, which I hadn't used in over a year. The body had only a sentence and no name. An autopsy showed defensive scars. Be careful because you're next. Danny Linwood. His official cause of death was suicide. He cut his wrists in a locked apartment, which is a classic staging move. But Danny used to be a gymnast and was strong, balanced, and determined to fight. I looked at the screen for a long time before turning it off again. The Cinder was someone I hadn't heard from since the Sentinel days. An old ops teammate who had access to files that didn't make the news. By that time, Silas was safe at my sister June's cabin in northern Minnesota, tucked away among the pines in dial-up silence. When I dropped him off, she didn't ask any questions. She just gave me a look that told me she knew what was at stake. I drove back through the night, following cold trails and even colder instincts. When I got to Di's apartment, it was already locked up, and police tape fluttered around like an afterthought. But I wasn't interested in the apartment itself. I was interested in the name that came up when I looked into her last calls. Roman Blake. That's the name he used with her. Roman Blake, not Bryce Levon, the name on the penthouse lease or the fake LLCs. Roman Blake was a name that was just fake enough to fool people who didn't want to look further. I looked into every alias, address, and shell company he set up over the last 6 years. And that's when the truth began to leak out like poison from a broken pipe. His real name was Bryce Levon, and he used to work as an intelligence contractor. He was caught in 2 European investigations for money laundering through strategic influence networks, which is fancy language for things like blackmail, wire transfers, and media manipulation. Nothing ever stuck. The man was a ghost wrapped in bank statements. But it didn't end there. I found my way back to Maya's father, Eloise's late husband and a well-known investment banker. It turned out that his company went out of business with hardly a news story about it. On paper it was bankrupt, but the assets were sold and moved through a small community trust in the Cayman Islands. That trust was now linked to a holding company with ties to Roman. Sorry, Bryce. I ran it over and over again. Offshore movement, fake charity funds, and large-scale filtering. It wasn't just betrayal. It was transnational crime hidden behind country clubs and champagne toasts. And to top it all off, the system thought I would just take my hurt pride, keep my head down, and visit my family on the weekends. The room was dark except for the soft glow of bank trails and private chat logs. They told me to be quiet. Danny tried to speak, but she was already dead. I looked at the file again and saw an unsent message in her drafts. It wasn't meant for anyone, but it had my name on it. Silas is in danger and I think she knows. I also didn't want to believe it, but something is wrong. Please call me as soon as you read this. I missed the chance. I closed my eyes for a second and felt the weight of it. It wasn't guilt. It was what was going to happen. Silas was no longer just a sideshow. They've been keeping an eye on me and us, waiting for the right time to tie up any loose ends. But I don't tie them up, I strike. I packed my hard drives, backup phones, and protected flash drives that I hadn't used in years. I changed cars twice and used different license plates each time. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was protocol. Then I did something I hadn't done since I left the Sentinel group. I called my old handler on my burner phone, which only had one number for rings. He answered like I hadn't been gone. Warren, I need an update on Bryce Levon. Cross-check with old Havana operations and Montenegro files, I asked. During the pause, someone said, "Then you just made yourself a target." I replied, "I've been one. Now I'm just returning fire." I hung up the phone. Di's funeral would be in 2 days. The casket would be closed, and it would be a quiet ceremony. I wouldn't be going not because I didn't care, but because if I did, I'd draw a lot of attention to Silas. I printed out a copy of her last message, carefully folded it, and put it in the pocket of my jacket because I wouldn't let her warning go unanswered. They think I'm from the past and that I'll break, but they don't understand something simple. I buried more dangerous men than Bryce, and I never forget the people who tried to warn me. Not Danny. Not this time. The first thing that caught my eye was the scar. It was jagged and badly healed, like it had been done with a blade meant for cutting rope instead of skin. It went from just below his right eye to the edge of his mouth, making his smirk look fake. He sat across from me at Vinton Bar like we were old friends, catching up after a war we both felt bad about. "You're making noise, Silas, Dad," he said jokingly, tilting his rocks glass toward me. The bourbon inside barely moved. He hadn't drunk it. It was just a prop, like the smile he wore, and the way he leaned back in the booth, totally at ease. "Also, I think you should stop looking for flaws in things you don't understand." I didn't move. My palms were facing down on the table, and my hands stayed open and flat. But I looked into his eyes. How they didn't really blink. The military was in charge. He wasn't around to talk. Basically, he was here to warn you. They gave me a soft option before they decided they didn't want to negotiate with me. "You mean the killing of Danny?" I kept my voice low and asked. "Or the fact that your son Bryce is sitting on a bunch of digital mines and doesn't know anyone is looking?" The man with the scars didn't move. Not even a flicker. That told me more than any words could. He said with a little lean, "Let me explain something. Bryce thought you'd fade away, so we let you live. A lot of men in your situation do. Divorce, child custody, death, and short meetings with your child on the weekends. You hide your shame and don't say anything." I gave them a raised look. "What do you do when your little dream doesn't come true?" He laughed. "This one is lighter and clearer. Let us inform you of what you have to lose." I knew they were wrong at that point. He believed I was still a man who could be scared. Still the guy who smiled nicely when Tint changed ownership. Who turned away when Maya showed off her new ring. Who didn't say anything when Roman Bryce said something silly during picking times. I hadn't met them yet. Not the real me. I said in a low, cold voice, "You show up again. You're not going to leave on your feet." He cocked his head as if he found it funny. "Is that a threat?" I said no. "I've already written down my promise." He laughed and stood up. "You're lucky that your boss still cares about feelings. That kid of yours? He's really cute and sweet. It would be bad if he got caught in something." My heart didn't even skip a beat. I taught my body not to respond to danger. Not even that one. He turned around and left through the side door, disappearing like smoke into the alley. That's how long I stayed in the room. It wasn't because I was scared. I had to wait. Given time to think I wasn't following. Let him believe the threat came true. When I stood up, I forgot to pay my tab. I walked right past the hostess, didn't even look back, and got into the black car I had parked 3 blocks away. I drove alone. There was no music or calls. There was only the low hum of tires on asphalt and the thought of my next move. They thought they could make my son afraid. There was a line they crossed that they didn't know about. I was back at the safe house I had hired under a fake name. I opened the box that I had hidden under the floor. There was encrypted SATCOM gear, hard drives, flash drives, and a small black box with a red sticker inside. That sticker was useful now. Putting the flash drive into the laptop was the first thing I did. Pictures of Bryce and Maya's encrypted texts to each other. Backups of their texts are what I looked at weeks ago when I became suspicious. Wire transfers go through Swiss, Belgian, and Luxembourgish shelf companies. There were notes written on contracts, emails, and even a scan of a book that Danny must have sent before she died. They made my stomach turn. That's not all it was, though. It was a system, a machine that was made to disappear people. Someone brought something to Roman's apartment at 2:03 a.m. I watched from a spy camera I set up a few days ago. Watched the lobby feed. The runner was clean and worked through a proxy. His things were hidden from him. It was just a small box that was wrapped nicely and signed by a friend. The flash drive and a note on nicely folded blood red paper were inside that box. "You made a threat against the wrong dad." I saw Bryce open it. His response was great. A tilt of the head and a quick look at the camera in the hallway, and then nothing. The man with scars came in a short time later. The camera position didn't catch the whole conversation, but they did talk. It didn't matter. The match was already lit. They knew now. It wasn't a trick. I let out a sigh as I leaned back in my chair at the safe house. I hadn't slept in days. My body was full of anger and caffeine, but I felt like I was getting clear. There was more to this than a woman who lied to me or a guy who stole my nameplate at the family dinner. They thought the child was a way to gain power, control, or ownership. Silas wasn't a draw. He was my gift. And they just told me I could go to war. I told her to come by herself. Maya, no Romans, no group, no reasons. At noon in the middle of the week, Ivy Bridge Park's playground and walking paths would be mostly empty. In a text message that was too short to trust, she said yes. One word. Okay. Not a single punctuation mark or feeling. Just command. Always in charge, hiding behind politeness. I didn't believe her at all, though. I got there 3 hours early and looked around the grounds. It looked like a sleeping hawk, but my boots moved across the roof of the old train depot that looked out over the center green. People went to Ivy Bridge to relax and be seen, but to a skilled eye, it looked like a web of weak cover and easy choke points. Before she even got there, I marked 3 people. The first person was standing near the water spigot with sunglasses that were too dark for the cloudy sky. The second one pretended to be a jogger and ran around the same road every 7 minutes. The third one sat on a bench and read a newspaper. He never looked up. There was no phone, no movement, just gifs. It was like being an unwritten extra in a movie that all of a sudden had stakes. Not very good, but they were trained. It took Maya 20 minutes to get there. Dress. Red coat, designer bag, and carefully painted face to look like effort without despair. It was a subtle but visible scan of the area that she did once or twice. She didn't come see me until I told her to. I went from the roof to the ground, went around the rose garden, and sat down on the bench next to her. The one she picked so she could see the exit from her car. She jumped. I said, "Hello, Maya." Over the phone. Or should I call you Operation Lore? She asked. She tensed up. She clenched her hands around her back strap and said, "You need help. You're crazy. This is getting worse," I said as I slid a phone across the bench from us. "Then I guess this is a cry for help." She hesitated and held the phone like it might bite her. I watched her face as she unlocked it and the screen lit up. It showed dozens of messages between Bryce, Roman, and her father. The backups were encrypted, but I got through them days ago. They hadn't noticed, or maybe they thought I wasn't smart enough to do it. I pointed to the first text. I read that one out loud to her because she wouldn't move. He still doesn't believe it, and it's getting old seeing how blind he is. She stopped moving, and I saw her wrists start to shake as she tried to sneak away. "I don't know what that means," she whispered. "Don't lie to me again. Not here. Not when the stakes are this high," she said, raising her eyes to mine. For a moment I saw something behind the mask. Maybe fear or regret, or both. "You don't understand," she said. "No, I understand more than you think. You were the bait. Bryce needed to get into the banking systems your dad used. The marriage gave him cover, and your mother gave him legitimacy. As for me, I was just a stand-in. The naive man who built a house and a life for me without realizing I was hiding evidence in his garage. That's not fair," she yelled. "Neither is sending armed guards to your own meeting," I replied, pointing to the fountain. "The guy with the Glock in his waistband, your jogger, earpiece, and the reader. He's probably the only one who knows how to shoot straight." She quickly turned around and her mask cracked. "I didn't bring them," she said. I laughed quietly, but not amused. "Of course not. You think Bryce will trust you now? You're a liability just like Danny." She looked down, her hands clenched. "There was no reason for Danny to die," I said. "That's the problem with Bryce. Collateral is just a word on a whiteboard." She caught her breath. I leaned in, my voice sharp, and said, "Still want joint custody." She didn't say anything. I watched her swallow hard, her eyes blinking faster, and her fake calm falling away flake by flake. I took out another file from my jacket. It had paper notes from Danny, bank receipts connected to Eloise's business, and a picture of Bryce getting on a jet registered under a different name. I told her to check the timestamp, which she did. Now her hands were shaking even more. "You're not in that picture, Maya, and neither is Silas," I told her. She said, he said we'd all start over. Clean slate."
Esther daher.
"People like Bryce don't start over. They disappear and burn whatever they used to get there." She looked at the ground and then back at me. "What do you want?" "For you to listen." I asked her. I have eyes everywhere now. When Bryce makes another move towards Silas, I let go of every text, route, and name, including yours. You'd ruin me, and you already have. I told her this would just level the playing field. She looked at the file and then at the people watching us. You have about a week before he turns on you, I told her as I stood there. Use it. No one could catch me because traps always have an endpoint that the hunter knows. I only paid attention to the money, not the noise, threats, or even Maya's shaking silence on the park bench. Money tells the truth that people try to hide. And Bryce. He had money going everywhere like ants leaving a broken nest. I watched the wires go through fake LLCs, go through Dubai, and end up somewhere in South Africa, where names are erased and new lives begin. It wasn't hard to figure out what he was up to. They were just too close to losing too much to stop. Bryce, Maya, and Silas. It was that last name that made me move, because I was not going to let my son disappear into some foreign limbo with a man who saw him as nothing more than a bargaining chip. I found the flight manifest using a private security clearance I still had access to from my time as a sentinel that was hidden under a shell account. The tail number 27JL was filed under a fake art investment firm. The departure time was 5:35 a.m., and the hangar was unlisted. The pilot crew wasn't marked, and that was my window. I got to Ridgehurst at 3:15. The air was cold and dry, and the wind was kicking up dust on the asphalt like a warning. The hangar was only partially lit. Not a single guard was around, just two mechanics whose faces I knew weren't real because they didn't look tired from work. I got past them by using the utility tunnel I had mapped out years ago when Ridgehurst was a backup base. Bryce was smart, but he wasn't original. Criminals often copy old escape routes and think they're writing new history. I drained the fuel lines in the control room, but not so much that the jet could no longer be used. Just enough to keep it from taking off without drawing attention to myself. Then I went into the cockpit and put a small flash drive on the captain's control panel. It was labeled in red marker. Not so fast. It had everything I had collected on it. They would try again, but the wire transfers, messages, and surveillance would make them sweat. And while they were sweating, the cavalry was coming. Before I left, I called one person on a secure line. It was Ren, a woman I trusted who worked for the FBI and owed me her life and career. I asked her for an anonymous tip. Fraud, kidnapping, possible money laundering, multiple felonies, and rightist air rip. She didn't ask any questions. I slipped out before the sun rose, got in my truck, and waited a mile away at an empty ranger station with my eyes on the runway. I saw them come in. Bryce was first, dressed in charcoal gray with no tie and a smug look that said he still thought he was smarter than gravity. Maya followed with her hair pulled back into a ponytail and big sunglasses on. My son Silas held her hand and looked back once toward the woods as if he could feel me there. I hoped he could. I watched the chaos happen like it was a scene I had already written. One of the mechanics grabbed Bryce and whispered something. Bryce barked into his phone and then walked toward the jet. That's when 3 Blackhawks dropped from the sky, causing chaos and a wall of dust. It should have ended there, but Maya ran. While everyone else stopped, she grabbed Silas and quickly ran through the East End service gate. I quickly moved, taking the back trail that I knew would cross hers. We met in the empty maintenance hangar. She didn't see me until I came out from behind a stack of crates. She had her gun raised, but the safety was off. I loved him, she said, her voice shaking. You were just supposed to be stable. My eyes never left hers. And Silas? What was he supposed to be? It made her eyes water and her lips part. She whispered, he wasn't part of the plan, but he's everything. I believed her. I really did. Even though her voice was really weird, it was real enough that I could offer her a piece of rope. I took out a folder from my coat that was sealed, labeled, and time-stamped. You testify, I said, and I keep you alive. The gun was put down. I'll even talk to the feds about Silas. She didn't say a word as she took the file. She knew what it meant. She knew she'd have to trade her past for a prison with glass walls and visits from guards. You'll never see him without permission, I told her. She nodded. Sirens started to sound. As the agents moved in silence, their weapons raised and their formation clean, she looked back at me once as they cuffed her. It wasn't an angry or pleading look, but something that looked like surrender. I watched them take her away. Silas was being held by one of the agents at the entrance to the hangar. As soon as he saw me, he got free and ran. I got down on my knees, caught him, and held him so tight I thought I'd never let go. I was scared. He whispered into my neck. I know, I replied, my voice breaking for the first time in days. Me too, he replied, looking up at me. Is Mom going to be okay? She'll be safe, I said with a heavy heart. That's all you need to know for now, I told him. He nodded and put his head on my shoulder. Outside, the sky got brighter. The agent blocked the runway, and somewhere behind us, Bryce screamed as he was thrown into a black van. He was finally grounded, just like the life he tried to steal. The air smelled like pine and slow rain. It clung to the cabin's wooden siding and slipped through the open windows early in the morning, before Silas woke up from snoring next to him under a thick quilt with rocket and rescue mud on it. We were safe now, or as safe as a man like me could hope to be. Northern Michigan had always felt like a break in time. And that's what I needed for Silas. A break. A fresh breath between the chaos and the next shadow. We bought the 30 acres of land 6 weeks after the hangar was destroyed. One paved road led into the house, and 2 fire trails led out through the woods. It was the kind of house that was meant to last, where you learn how to fix the roof yourself because you don't trust anyone else to climb it. Silas got used to it faster than I did. The first morning he named a puppy Rocket, and within days he couldn't live without it. Along the East Ridge, I buried perimeter sensors that sent video feeds to my phone every time someone broke into the trees or made a fort. I watched from the porch with my coffee, thankful that he still knew how to be a child. That meant I hadn't failed completely. But peace can test you. One night, after Silas had gone to sleep, I was looking at the video feeds from the sensors. They were basic. They only had local storage and pulse transfer to my personal receiver. They were off-grid, and they couldn't be tracked. I didn't check them out of fear. I did it because instinct never goes away. At 1:08 a.m., a feed flashed red zone 3 south tree line. It looked like a figure, but it was just the wind blowing through the tall grass. But at 110, the front porch camera went off. There was no movement or anything else that could be seen, just an envelope. I slowly opened the door with my gun tucked under my waist. The cold wind kissed my skin. The envelope was perfectly slid under the doormat. There were no tracks or sounds on the gravel path. Just that bright white rectangle against the wood. There was no return address or seal, just my name in thick black ink. S. Warren. I took it inside, locked all the doors, and opened it with my gloved hand. It was a picture of Silas laughing on the playground yesterday, with Rocket's tail just barely in frame as he washed from the fence. There was a note on the back. The story doesn't end with Bryce. He was just the start. See you soon. There was no signature. I stared at the picture until my eyes became blurry. My fingers clenched around the edge of the paper. My first thought wasn't fear, it was anger. Bryce and Maya were both in police custody. The feds had caught every accomplice they could find. Still, someone else had found us, gotten past all the security measures, watched my son, and left a message without setting off any alarms. This was more complicated than I thought. It was a new player, not clumsy like Bryce or loud like the scarred enforcer. This person was careful and quiet, like they'd waited for the dust to settle before coming out of the shadows. As I didn't expect to find a name right away, I took out my laptop, put in a drive, and turned on the Ghost protocol. This was a full network sweep of known aliases, satellite overlays, and digital chatter among black market groups. The phrase "this doesn't end with Bryce" brought up 3 previous documents. One from a South African banking breach, one from a Syrian arms dump, and a redacted memo I recognized from my Sentinel clearance. I felt sick when I heard the word Obsidian. It was a code name for a non-government hypercovert operation that came to light about once every 5 years, like a shark fin through calm water. It was said to work across continents, laundering money through war zones, trade deals, and media manipulation. Bryce was connected to the surface players,